Friends, remember this still the technical track from last week? No? Well, never mind. Anyway, tonight I'm gonna make a small diorama for it, and what I have in mind is a mountain road somewhere in Afghanistan. But why not Africa, where most of these vehicles are common? Well, because the best figures I could find were those two Afghan rebels, but we'll talk about them later. I also found this nice set of Afghan road signs for mini art, so I think we're off to a good start. The base doesn't have to be very spacious, but not too cramped either. Sometimes when you're composing a scene and want to depict a vast, open landscape, adding a bit of empty space around the model will emphasize that feeling. Conversely, a very tight composition might sell a claustrophobic atmosphere of, let's say, urban combat, but that's not our case here. Because Afghanistan is well known for its mountains, I wanted to make a sloped base. I had to bring out my large foam cutter for this because the scene wouldn't fit into the Proxon thermocut. Here I'm, for example, making a small hill from the leftover foam. To make it fit perfectly into the scene, I held it in place with toothpicks and then used the base as a cutting template. It's better to avoid gluing pieces of foam together because the PVA glue would interfere with the hot cutting wire. And because a mountain road is usually cut into the mountain, quite literally, a slope on the other side of the base will enhance that look we're after. Well, it's a pretty small composition, but more than enough to tell a simple story. Okay, making the groundwork is way more fun than cutting styrofoam, and for starters, I made lots of holes. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't just venting my frustration here. They actually serve a purpose because smooth, flawless styrofoam is not the best surface for VMS Smart Mud. Now the clay has something to hold on to and its application is way easier. I absolutely love this material because it's the most user-friendly medium for terrain modeling. You can actually find it on mishtoy.com, and if you use the promo code MFRIENDS2022 and you're a registered user, you'll get a 15% discount on all your orders. However, unlike other dioramas I've done so far, here I wanted to focus on the road section first, because it would need a lot of texture. Sprinkling the wet clay with the finest dirt from my garden, trademark, will not only make it look more authentic, but also makes it less sticky, so it's safe to imprint pretty much anything you want into it. Here I'm using a leftover wheel from the Toyota truck, and I'm definitely not holding back because ruts and tire tracks are awesome terrain features. I also make sure the car is firmly pressed into the ground, which is actually much easier than pressing a tank because this only has like 4 wheels. And then I added more tire tracks leading to those indentations made by the model because, the truck had to drive there somehow. When someone says Afghanistan, the first thing I imagine is the Rocky Mountain roads, and nothing makes your diorama look more Afghan than sprinkled cat litter. But I wanted each section of the diorama to have its own specific texture, and on the road it meant pushing those rocks into the ground. The VMS clay dries pretty slowly, so there's enough time to mess around with these things. Once this was all dealt with, I could seal everything I've created so far with a thick coat of diluted PVA glue, but first I soaked the surface with lacquer thinner. The dry earth soaks it up like a sponge, and the alcohol-based thinner breaks the surface tension, making it much easier for the PVA glue to flow and reach every corner. Once the road was dry, I could texture the mountain slopes. This pretty much meant just adding tons of rocks of varying sizes. I grabbed these pebbles in my garden, but they're not trademarked yet. Can't say the same about real earth from my garden though, and unlike the fine earth I used on the road, this one is more like, tiny rocks. Using just earth wouldn't be enough though, so once again I added lots of cat litter of different sizes. This one is probably intended for large or normal cats. And this one is, kittens, hamsters. Well, you get the gist of it. Rocks, pebbles and cat litter. It's all you need for an authentic rocky desert or a mountain in the desert. Okay, so now I could laminate the sides with proper 0.4mm veneer. Actually, I could have done it before I textured the ground. I mean, it would have saved me some time, but I had a good reason not to do so. The sad part is, I forgot why. It was probably because of all the rocks, as I wanted them to line up perfectly with the sides. Something along those lines, but you get it. Laminating the sides of the base is important because we want a clean, professional look, not a bare, untreated styrofoam. As I was saying, doing it earlier would save me some time, because now I had to cover the veneer with more of the VMS clay and retexture those sections with dirt and gravel. But hey, it got the job done and it's looking much prettier now. You won't see much vegetation in the desert or the mountains if they're located in the desert, but when you do, it's usually just small tufts of grass and some shrubs here and there. PVA glue, static grass applicator, and boom, that's done as well. So, here we have our base completed, including the road sign from MiniArt, and as usual with these raw sceneries, it mostly looks like a huge mess. But the textures are all there, and now we can make the terrain sing with paints. My usual approach is to prime the grass with something very dark, such as black or mahogany Mr. Surfacer. This helps us big time because we can paint some artificial shadows, and because this terrain is really textured, I sprayed some over the rocks as well. Plenty of opportunities for some post shading there, so I'm definitely making the most out of it. When it comes to airbrushing, I always start with vegetation because there's gonna be a ton of overspray, which I can fix later as I'm painting the actual ground. And I also like to start painting the grass with dry, yellowish tones, even if my intention is to make the grass happy and green. The yellow color gives you the option to make some of the tufts, or even parts of individual tufts, look both dry and fresh at the same time, which is not that uncommon in nature. In fact, judging from those very few reference photos I downloaded for this diorama, dry grass in the desert is almost dark brown. However, a splash of green will make this otherwise dry and dusty scene more lively and interesting. As for the ground itself, I post-shaded the life out of it. Starting with the darkest tone, flat earth, I sprayed it over the entire scene in a pretty thick layer. Fun fact, earth isn't actually flat. The second layer was buff, and this paint was sprayed more selectively. I started with a rather light, random layer over the entire road, and then I focused it mainly on the tire tracks and on those raised edges, trying to emphasize the three-dimensional effect. And finally, the lightest color was deck tan, which I sprayed in the same fashion, just in slightly smaller amounts. It's important to make the ground lighter than the final result, because some steps will make it a bit darker. Well, here's the fully airbrushed groundwork, and it already looks so dry and dusty, doesn't it? I think it creates a very nice atmosphere, and if I wasn't so obsessed with details, I'd call it done at this stage. All you need are these three colors. They're like a color modulation set for groundwork. Anyway, now let's rock some Vallejo acrylics ranging from old wood through light mud to orange brown. This is the slowest yet most oddly satisfying process, and it's so slow I'll have to speed it up for you. Basically, you pick out the various tones on the ground with different colors. I always like to start with the dark tone and end up with very pale ones, such as deck tan or light mud. If there are too many rocks on the ground, just break the base into smaller imaginary segments and paint them one at a time. And if you're curious, yes, this takes way longer than the airbrushing stage, but it's so worth it because it brings out every surface detail on the ground. If it makes the base look more authentic or more stylistic, that's gonna be a dilemma I'll leave up to you, but I think it definitely improves the overall look of the scene. Painting those large rocks requires a different approach, a wet blending method. Basically, you start with a dark color, and before it has time to dry, you apply lighter and lighter colors on top of it, following the direction of sunlight, and the wet paints will do the blending for you, creating a pretty authentic result. painting large rocks seems intimidating, but it's actually insanely easy. So that's everything painted appropriately with acrylics. And once again, I could call it done at this stage, but I wanted to improve the road a little. I prepared 2 oil paints in advance, the same ones I used to weather the Toyota, and the industrial earth color was applied as a wash over everything that contains texture, be it rocks or the tire tracks. I just washed the life out of them. That's also the reason why I painted the earth a bit lighter, because this step darkens it. The second color, light mud, was applied very thick, using the dry brushing method. This is the color I used to paint dust accumulations on the model, and here I'm using it to bring out the minute grainy texture on the ground, but to also highlight those tire tracks. The dark wash will remain in the deepest parts, while the dry brush will emphasize the raised sections. And that's the groundwork finished, my friends. Whew, what a change and what a blast! I managed to paint it all in one day, which is suspiciously fast for me. So let's quickly paint the road sign. First I toned down the vivid decals with a light grey acrylic filter, basically the same paint I used as a base coat here. And then it was just about the usual weathering techniques, just like on any model. An enamel pin wash to outline all the surface details and add some subtle stains of dirt. Chipping, and I mean a lot of chipping, because imagine a road sign stuck in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. I think that would be pretty worn down, and lots of chipping means lots of rust tones. It's fun to apply these basic weathering effects to something extremely common, something we see in our everyday lives. I also added some subtle dust effects to blend it in with the ground, and I think it looks right at home there, adding another bit of color to the scene. Okay, and finally, figures. One is from Stalingrad, the other one from Black Dog. They're both really nice, with some interesting textures and detailed sculpting. I even found a reference photo for the guy from Stalingrad. What a small world we live in, eh? But okay, they both have some casting flaws, especially the one from Black Dog, but it was quite easy to fix them with Green Stuff Buddy. Except one part. I mean, it was a real genius move to put the casting spur right on top of his head. Not very cash money if you ask me. And as you can imagine, I painted them using my standard black and white pre-shading, followed up by glazing. Getting the black primer into every shadowed area is very important, and not overdoing it with the white is even more important. I love this stage because it shows you every detail and texture you're gonna paint, and it's interesting to see the different handwriting of each sculptor. Glazing is about applying the actual paint in several highly diluted layers, letting the pre-shaded surface show through. This way, you'll get most of the highlights and shadows done in a very simple way with very nice results. I have a detailed video about this method, so check it out if you want to know the fine nuances of the technique. But basically, after I glaze each part of the figure, I give it one round of extra shadows, most of the time done with diluted black-brown, and 1 or 2 rounds of additional highlights to make it all look extra crispy. Highlights are usually mixed from the base color, in this case flat brown, and Iraqi sand or Dektan, sometimes even basic skin tone depending on what color I'm highlighting. Are those results excellent? Well, definitely not, but at least I'm becoming confident enough to try new color combinations. Especially the light beige, almost white tunic was kinda intimidating at first. And this method is a real lifesaver for any diorama modeler. It just makes the whole process so streamlined and the results are very predictable. So all I had to do now was to glue those brothers in arms to their respective positions on the ground, also glue the car, and finally paint the wooden sides black. I lost my can of household paint, so I had to use Tamiya flat black, and oh my gosh, this base consumed like 1/3 of the bottle. So anyway, my friends, here's the finished diorama. Again, as with most of my works, it has a pretty rudimentary story, nothing exciting going on there, but that's actually how I like it. First of all, I'm often limited by the selection of figures. can't make an action scene if all you can buy are figures in relaxed positions, right? And I definitely don't have the skills to modify them. Nor time. And then there's the other reason. I never do action scenes, and all my dioramas are kinda peaceful, if we can call a military diorama that. Yeah, because even though I mostly build military vehicles and the soldier figures accompanying them can be often considered as the bad guys, I like to believe that we're all humans at the end of the day, and putting that human element into the scene is just my jam. In other news, this is the last video I'll ever do in 2022. I need to do some final adjustments in the hallway, and that will conclude my complete house overhaul, so that's pretty sweet. And then I'll finally have some rest for a few days. But I'm already looking forward to the next model, which is gonna be massive. I might even buy a spare compressor in case my current one blows up when I'm trying to post-shade that thing. But hey, let's keep that for January 2023, okay? In the meantime, I wanna say thank you for watching, my friends, and I wish you all the best for the next year. And a special thank you must go to my wonderful patrons who make this show possible. If you like what I'm doing and want to get more of it and in return support my work, you can go to my Patreon page and see what kind of reward would you like. I'm posting there almost every day with updates from my workbench, so you could get a glance at what the next massive model will be. We can get in touch through DMs, comments and emails. I'm posting one weekly ad-free videos. I also have some small 3D models for detailing your projects, a bunch of reference photos from the real world if you need inspiration for old buildings, landscapes and so on, and these beautiful studio photos which you can download in full resolution. Alright, dear friends, Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate this holiday. I hope you'll find something that'll make you happy under the tree, be it a model, a lighthouse, big chungus or mushrooms. And again, although 2022 is almost over, we've got stuff to do in 2023. Stay strong, kings and queens, build those models, don't just collect them, and I'll see you in the next one, next year. Cheers!